Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. So I'm back on the Wayne's World neck. So this is part 2 of my series on a refret job for this old thing. And I'm gonna do a little bit to prepare it for the fret job. I just want to check straightness. I know that this thing had an issue. Whenever I removed the frets, it was a little bit bowed, and it's an up bow, so it's lower in the center than it is on the sides. I just wanted to double check that the truss rod nut is completely loose, and it is. And I'm gonna grab my straight edge, and it is definitely still bowed in the center here. Now if you look at this neck from the side, you would actually notice that the rosewood seems to be a little bit thicker on the ends than in the middle. I have no idea why that would be, and so I think this neck has probably always had a little bit of an issue, and it doesn't surprise me that I ended up with it because it was sold without the body, and why would anybody remove a nice Wayne's World Japanese neck from a Wayne's World Japanese Stratocaster unless there was a problem with it? So I'm gonna probably just make sure that the truss rod nut is completely loosened, and I'll do that by just actually totally removing it. Alright, well, I'll store that someplace safe and we'll get started leveling this fretboard. I'm gonna sand the whole thing, and I'm gonna do that until it's completely flat based on where it is right now, which is with no tension on the truss rod. Alright, so if you hear some background noise, it's because the air conditioner's on, and I apologize, but I'll try to filter that out. But what I've done is I've removed the normal carpet that you see on my workbench, and I've just gone down to the bare metal. And the reason I've done that is because I've watched a lot of videos recently on how to do this sanding, and a lot of them lay the radius beam down flat on a surface or clamp it in a vise, and then they run the neck across the radius beam, and that's what keeps everything nice and flat and straight. And so what I've done in preparation for that is I put some clean release tape down on the workbench and on the radius block itself. Then I put some double-sided duct tape on top of that. I only did that just to make the double-sided duct tape not leave residue on my beam or on my workbench, and to make removal that much easier. So let me just go ahead and peel this backing off this duct tape and stick this down. Alright, almost easier said than done, right? But now I've got a nice flat surface on which I can run this neck. Hopefully that takes this bow out of this thing. I've got that 80 grit sandpaper that I'm going to start with because this thing has quite a lot of bow in it. I probably wouldn't normally start with that much grit, but I've got a lot of material to remove, so I don't want to waste any time. Now this is right about the same width as the block itself, so I just need to cut it to length. Alright, this is looking right, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the backing. Alright, well, that looks pretty good. I'm going to trim the ends just to make sure that I don't get any sanding where I don't want it to be. So now that I've got my surface ready and my neck ready, how will I be able to tell when I've sanded enough and when this thing's perfectly flat? Well, I've seen a couple of videos on this, and the way that they recommended to do it is to mark the neck with some chalk. So now when I do my sanding, if I'm flat, then all my chalk will be gone. But if I still have chalk in the middle, then I haven't sanded quite enough. So the way I'm going to do this is just to lay it flat like this. And I'm going to use the heel and the headstock as my guide. And I'm only pressing very lightly. And I'm going to run just like that. And so you can see as I get started, I'm definitely seeing the results on the ends first. And that's exactly where I would expect to see them. And it's going to take me a while before I get this thing down to flat. So the longer I spend on this, the more you can see that the sanding marks are coming in towards the middle. That's exactly what I want. You can start to see the results on the fretboard as well. I've just got to spend some more time on this, going back and forth, and I'm going to do that off camera just because it would be a very long sequence. So I'll talk to you guys again when I'm done with this. Okay, well, I'm just checking in as I'm going through the process, and I don't know if you can see this or not on the camera, but there's a dark spot here about this wide. I have already switched to 120. I did that probably when that dark spot was an inch wider on each side, and I'm trying to get down to the 400 grit but I'm trying not to have to sand really deeply into the fretboard if I don't have to. So I want to go the minimum distance, and that means I'm going to try to sneak up on the 400 so that the 400 just takes the thing flat and doesn't remove any more than it has to in the middle of the neck. And the reason I did that is just because I'm looking at this thing on the sides of the fretboard, and I can really tell a difference here on the ends and here in the middle in the depth of the fret slots, and I'm worried about going too far. But again, I'm just going through the process like this. The main things to keep in mind as you're doing this are just make sure that your sandpaper doesn't load up with dust from that rosewood board. Just kind of keep it vacuumed out, and just make sure you keep a nice even pressure the whole time, not favoring one side or the other, and not favoring one end or the other. All right, and as you go through this process, you'll see this spot in the center, or at least I will, because mine's bent this way, but you'll see this spot in the center getting smaller and smaller, and you'll see all this build up here in the fretboard. Now let me show you what it looks like after you vacuum that up. All right, well, you can see the color difference in the sandpaper after you vacuum it. Now, I'm just going to keep going until I get really, really close on this, and I actually probably am almost to the point where I'm going to switch to the 220, and then I'm going to switch to the 400, but I'm going to switch to the 220. I'm going to try to go ahead and get all of the dark spot out. And again, I'm using chalk occasionally, but I can see this dark spot where it hasn't been sanded, so I don't really need so much chalk. I'm going to get all of that out. Then the very last step is going to be the 400 across the whole thing, just to get all the 220 scratches out evenly. So here's the sanded board, and I've been working on cutting the fret slots a little bit deeper. They really need it on the ends especially, because this is where I took off the most material. They were pretty close in the middle, but the way that I'm gauging that is with this little fret depth gauge here, or a tang depth gauge, I guess you would say. It's got a couple of lines on it, and I'm trying to get up to that second line, because that's about where I've measured the depth of my tang. It's somewhere between that first and second line. And I've got my little Japanese saw. The biggest thing when I'm doing this is just to make sure that the saw doesn't jump out of the slot and scratch the board. This little Japanese saw has a push and a pull direction. There's really no best way to do it. I guess I could use either side, honestly. I like to try to saw the high spots that I know I have, and then just give it some longer passes to kind of even the whole slot out. I could be saving this rosewood dust, and actually I already did fill a little imperfection here with some dust and some super glue as I was doing the sanding process. I don't really have a whole lot of damage other than that, so I don't think I need to save it. Okay, well, it's fret time, and I've got my frets all kind of opened up here from the bag anyway, and I did check the radius against the board, and it's spot on, so I'm happy about that. I was kind of nervous about bending these myself, to be honest, so I'm glad to start with a preformed set. This is a Fender set. Believe it or not, it actually says made in Japan back on the back of the package. It's kind of cool that the neck was made in Japan, and I'm ending up with frets that were made in Japan, so it's kind of true to the original. But anyway, let's go ahead and install this. Now, I'm going to use a hammer here. It's a plastic hammer, and I've seen this hammer used on multiple fret jobs on YouTube and other places. It's not a dead blow hammer, but it is plastic and non-marring, so I think it's going to work out just fine. These frets have these little teeth, and one thing I was kind of doing is just kind of lining up the teeth in the slot so that I get the maximum number of teeth, and I don't have like a tooth that's right on the edge, like right about there. So that's seated all the way across. I don't know if I need to do anything else to these, but they are sitting down quite well. I haven't decided if I'm going to glue these things yet, but I'm going to go ahead and get them installed first, and then we'll think about it. Okay, well, that's the basics, so I'm going to take the camera down for a moment and save some memory card, but when I come back I should have all 21 of these installed. All right, well, this is a good place to end the episode. When we come back next time, I'll show you all how I'm going to glue the frets in place, clamping them against my beam, using some super glue and some clamps, and we'll get started from there. But anyway, as always, I really love it when you guys hit that like button. I love it when you leave me a comment. I really love it when you hit subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.